One of the most dangerous things a narcissist can lose is control over another person's perception. Not just control over the relationship itself, but control over how reality is interpreted inside the other person's mind. This is why confusion becomes such a central psychological mechanism in narcissistic dynamics. Most people assume the narcissist simply wants admiration, attention, validation, or power. But underneath all of those desires exists something even more fundamental. The narcissist needs psychological control over narrative stability itself. They need to influence how events are perceived, how emotions are interpreted, how conflicts are remembered, and ultimately how reality becomes organized inside another human being. This is why interactions with narcissistic personalities often feel strangely disorienting. The problem is not always direct cruelty. In many cases, the deeper issue is contradiction. One moment the narcissist appears loving. The next, they appear cold and hostile. One day they praise you. The next, they subtly devalue you. They may insult you while insisting they are helping you. They may provoke emotional reactions and then criticize those same reactions as evidence of instability. They may rewrite conversations that happened only hours earlier or deny behaviors you directly witnessed. Over time, the victim begins experiencing a growing collapse of interpretive certainty, and this confusion is not accidental. The narcissist often needs confusion because confusion weakens independent perception. A person who clearly understands what is happening becomes difficult to manipulate. A person who trusts their instincts becomes difficult to control. But a person trapped in uncertainty becomes psychologically vulnerable. Confusion interrupts decisiveness. It destabilizes confidence. It produces hesitation, self-doubt, hypervigilance, and dependency. The victim begins spending enormous amounts of mental energy trying to understand what is happening, rather than protecting themselves from it. This is one reason narcissistic abuse becomes so psychologically exhausting. The victim is not merely reacting to isolated events. They are constantly attempting to reconcile incompatible realities. The narcissist's words may conflict with their behavior. Their tone may conflict with their stated intentions. Their public image may conflict with their private actions. Their emotional reactions may seem disproportionate, irrational, or contradictory. The victim becomes trapped inside a perpetual state of interpretive instability. The psychologist Leon Festinger explored a similar phenomenon through the concept of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when contradictory beliefs or realities exist simultaneously within the mind, creating psychological tension. Narcissistic relationships frequently generate massive amounts of cognitive dissonance because the victim is continuously exposed to incompatible signals. The narcissist says they love you while humiliating you. They claim honesty while constantly manipulating information. They present themselves as victims while behaving aggressively toward others. The human mind naturally attempts to resolve contradiction, so the victim often begins distorting their own perceptions in order to preserve psychological coherence. This is where the danger deepens. Healthy communication creates clarity. Healthy relationships reduce unnecessary ambiguity. Emotionally stable people generally seek resolution, understanding, consistency, and coherence. Narcissistic communication often does the opposite. It introduces fragmentation into the psychological environment. Conversations become circular. Conflicts never fully resolve. Definitions constantly shift. Expectations move unpredictably. Emotional goalposts relocate without warning. The victim slowly loses confidence in their ability to accurately interpret reality. The anthropologist and systems theorist Gregory Bateson explored similar dynamics through the concept of the double bind. A double bind occurs when contradictory messages are delivered simultaneously in ways that make resolution impossible. The narcissist may demand honesty while punishing truthfulness. They may demand vulnerability while weaponizing emotional openness. They may insist upon closeness while creating emotional danger inside intimacy itself. The victim eventually reaches a point where every possible response feels psychologically unsafe. This creates paralysis. Paralysis is useful to the narcissist because confused people become easier to dominate psychologically. A confused person becomes reactive instead of grounded. They become emotionally preoccupied. They begin seeking reassurance from the very individual destabilizing them. This creates an extremely destructive feedback loop in which the narcissist becomes both the source of confusion and the temporary source of relief from that confusion. This is one reason trauma bonds become so powerful. Intermittent reinforcement plays a major role here. The narcissist alternates unpredictably between affection and hostility, validation and criticism, warmth and emotional withdrawal. The nervous system becomes trapped in a cycle of uncertainty and reward anticipation. The The victim starts chasing moments of emotional relief and stability. This dynamic resembles variable reward systems studied extensively in behavioral psychology, where inconsistent rewards often create stronger compulsive attachment patterns than consistent rewards do. The psychiatrist R.D. Laing described forms of psychological mystification in which one person systematically distorts another person's sense of reality. Mystification does not merely involve lying. It involves destabilizing another person's interpretive framework entirely. The victim gradually stops trusting their emotional reactions, memories, instincts, perceptions, and conclusions. Eventually, they begin relying more heavily upon the narcissist's interpretations than their own internal experience. This is why many victims describe narcissistic abuse as feeling unreal or dreamlike. Their nervous system senses danger, contradiction, and hostility, yet their conscious mind struggles to organize the experience coherently. The narcissist's manipulations are often subtle enough to preserve plausible deniability while still producing deep emotional destabilization. This creates chronic mental overprocessing. Victims replay conversations repeatedly, searching for hidden meanings, trying to determine whether certain comments were intentional, wondering whether they misunderstood events, and analyzing interactions long after they occur. The confusion itself becomes traumatic. Over time, the victim's nervous system may enter states of chronic hypervigilance. Small tonal shifts become emotionally loaded, facial expressions become overanalyzed, silences become threatening, delayed responses trigger anxiety. The person becomes psychologically conditioned to scan constantly for instability, because instability has become associated with emotional danger. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott wrote extensively about false self structures and the suppression of authentic emotional experience beneath performative identity systems. Narcissistic personalities frequently become deeply attached to image management and external control because their inner psychological stability is fragile. Genuine accountability threatens the false self because accountability exposes contradiction, vulnerability, dependency, shame, and emotional inadequacy. Confusion, therefore, becomes protective. If reality remains unstable enough, the narcissist can avoid direct confrontation with truth. This is also why narcissists often rewrite history. Past events become altered to fit present emotional needs. Agreements disappear. Statements are denied. Motivations become revised retroactively. Conflicts are reframed in self-serving ways. The goal is not merely deception. The deeper goal is preservation of narcissistic identity structures. Reality itself becomes emotionally negotiable, so long as the narcissistic self-image remains protected. Projection also plays a major role in this process. Narcissists often unconsciously externalize their own disowned emotional states onto others. Their dishonesty becomes your dishonesty. Their hostility becomes your aggression. Their instability becomes your instability. Their confusion becomes your confusion. This creates enormous psychological disorientation because the victim is forced into defending against accusations that often originate from the narcissist's own fragmented inner world. The psychoanalyst Otto Kernberg explored how pathological narcissism frequently involves deeply split psychological structures in which positive and negative self-representations remain poorly integrated. This instability contributes to rapid shifts between idealization and devaluation. One moment the victim is viewed as perfect. The next, they are treated as threatening, disappointing, selfish, disloyal, or defective. The victim struggles to understand what changed, because the shifts often originate less from objective reality and more from the narcissist's fluctuating internal emotional regulation. Eventually, many victims begin realizing something critical. The confusion was never incidental, it was functional. Confusion prevented stable interpretation. Stable interpretation threatened manipulation. Manipulation supported narcissistic control. The chaos itself became part of the architecture. This realization changes everything. The victim stops obsessing over isolated incidents and begins recognizing systemic patterns instead. They stop asking, "Did this one interaction mean something?" and start asking, "Why does every interaction leave me psychologically destabilized?" That shift in perspective becomes extremely important because narcissistic manipulation often survives through fragmentation. The victim becomes trapped analyzing individual moments while missing the larger relational structure underneath them. True recovery begins when clarity becomes more important than preserving the relationship itself. The victim slowly rebuilds trust in their own perceptions. They begin valuing emotional consistency over intermittent validation. They stop requiring the narcissist's agreement in order to validate their own reality. They recognize that healthy relationships do not produce chronic interpretive collapse. Healthy love does not require perpetual confusion in order to survive. In the end, narcissists need confusion because confusion protects the false self. It preserves manipulation. It prevents stable accountability. It weakens resistance. But once the victim begins understanding the structure behind the chaos, the psychological spell gradually weakens, because manipulation depends heavily upon disorientation, and clarity is the thing narcissistic control systems fear the most.